Okay, so wow, kind of a big group. This elective is titled How to Put Together Blocks, roughly. Um, just sort of like two things to start us off. Uh, you know, when I used to debate, which was quite a long time ago, one of the sort of big weaknesses that I had was coming up with stuff on the spot. So I was pretty good about being prepared. I was pretty good about having, arguments, ready to go. But I was not very good when you were like, you're on the spot now, now extend this DA. Like I could kind of do it, but it didn't come out with sort of the precision or grace that I might have if I was sort of going to make an argument, right? That's sort of where blocks come in, which is sort of documents that help you sort of remember the precise way that you wanted to sort of deliver a set of arguments that you can put together before a tournament or before a round. Okay. The second thing is, my personal experience has been that I generally am the person writing most of the blocks for our team, just because I'm pretty good at it. And so hopefully I can give you some insight into sort of block writing, how to do it, when to do it, and when not to do it. They'll help you sort of figure out just like how do I navigate these things. So sort of first things that I kind of want to go over before talking about like how to write a block and maybe showing you an example is that judges despise block readers. Okay, judges despise block readers. We can tell like when you're like judging, and you might have also been on sort of the receiving end of this. You'll be able to tell who is reading a block and who is not pretty quickly, just by the fact that usually your card reading voice is very different from the voice that you use for reading, just like off the cuff, right? So most people kind of know that you're doing it and they hate it. Okay. Here's a couple of examples of where it really goes wrong. So like reading the same 2NCK overview for every team that starts with quote, they've missed the boat on X thesis claim. No, like you've missed the boat on the line by line. Second, not using the 2AC, like not using 2AC vocab. So the 2AC is like, the alt seeds the political. The 2NC says group the reform debate. It's like that was not what they said, right? Or the 2AC says no solvency, certainty key. And then the 2NC says three answers to their perception takeout. It's like it might be the same argument, but you're clearly not using the 2AC's vocabulary or the vocabulary of the speech before it. So it makes it obvious that you're reading a block as opposed to actually arguing the thing that you're arguing, right? Or some of you don't even bring up your flow to the speech. So like some of you will literally just bring your computer up and then start reading from the computer. Pretty good indication that's like you're not doing any actual debating. Like you're literally just reading off the computer. For me, that's like a 27.5 cap. Like I do not give you higher speaker points than that for not bringing a flow up, right? Pacing. So some of you read blocks like you're reading cards, which basically means it's totally incomprehensible, right? Like the biggest problem is just like you're going like 300 words per minute on this block, and then it's like, okay, well, think about how many cards, like every word in a card that you've written down. My guess is not that many, uh, maybe, unless you're like super intelligent AI, like you probably are not. Like every word in a card is getting written on the flow, right? Same thought. So like imagine if your block was spread at that pace. It's like, can I write that down? It's like no. And for me, I'm not even gonna try. Like I'm just gonna be like, yeah, okay. Like, this is a card, so I'm just gonna wait for you to finish. You know, reading blocks that are not written by you. Oh, this is a pretty big one. So you do not sound natural when you're reading someone else's block. The reason why is that it's not language that you've written it. So it just sounds really scattered. Like you don't really know how it's supposed to sound, right? So like the goal, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but like the goal when reading a block is to read as if you're not actually just reading, that you sound pretty animated and that your language is reflecting the stuff that you usually say. So it's like if you're reading someone else's, and this is especially true for K blocks, it's like if you're reading someone else's K blocks, it's usually the case that you don't sound that good. And it's because you're not using, the language that you usually use. Okay. Finally, blocks are just universally seen as lazy at debating. Like I would say, like if you're, trying to put down one of your community members, please don't. But if you are, usually the thing that comes to mind is people that are just like, oh, like you don't actually debate, you just read blocks. That's kind of like the usual comment. And that's usually sort of what judges are also thinking too, which is like you're not doing real debating, just reading, right? Does this mean that you should never write blocks or like you should treat every debate like it's an impromptu round or you're going into like a 30-minute extemp? Like, absolutely not, right? Like, you should obviously have blocks. I think the thing to sort of remember is that blocks are a living, breathing document. Okay, blocks are a living, breathing document. There's obviously a benefit to writing down your thoughts, right? Like that shouldn't be a big surprise to you. If you've done debate for a while now, like obviously it's easier for you to debate if things are written down, right? But the other thing is like some thoughts need some polish and precision, right? So think about if you're debating a counterpoint, like you're trying to debate perm do the counterpoint and the F and the neg. It's like you're not going to be able to do that effectively by just being like, yeah, let me like delete my computer and like go up with just my flow, right? Unless you're truth, probably. Like you're probably not going to be able to show up and be like, just debating perm do the counterpoint here, right? It's like you probably need some very specific things that are written down. That being said, when I say it's a living document, I mean that it's a malleable document and it should change from debate to debate. Okay. Blocks is a living, breathing document, means it's a malleable document. It should change from debate to debate. Okay, so, in one debate, let's say, the perm do the counterplan block has a couple of arguments in it. Let's say in one debate, the 2AC's execution of this argument is perm do the counterplan, counterplan is supposed to be functionally and textually competitive. Okay, it's like, okay, so the things they said were perm do the counterplan, they said functional, and then they said textual. The way that I would arrange the 2 and C block then would be, they say perm to the counterplan. It is functionally, legitimate explanation. It is textually legitimate explanation because that is the order in which the 2AC went. It should not be the case that you're just like group perm to the counterplan and then you just read the block straight down because like a lot of the time that does not reflect the organization that the 2AC is given you. For all off-case positions, you should be using the 2AC order. Similar thought about language of arguments. So my guess is that if you're writing a critique, everybody probably has included a block that's titled like AT Reform, where they include all their stuff that's like the state's not that great, or our critique is not about the state being bad, whatever your argument is, right? The 2AC is not likely to just use the phrase reform every single time. They might use some different stuff. Seed the political, the state is good, progress is possible, right? Different synonyms for largely the same concept. It's like your block needs to reflect the changes in the vocabulary. Right. So it's like if they said progress is possible, your 2 and C should not be reform is bad. Right. It should be like progress is not possible or progress is possible is irrelevant. Right. So it's like you're using the language that they're using. I think a lot of folks underrate the importance of this. So like using the exact language that the team is using makes it seem like you're flowing even when you're not. So like I know a lot of teams who are very much block dependent. It's like the way to make it seem like you're actually engaging their thing is to change the vocab so it pretty much is exactly matching the vocab that they're using and then the order of the arguments that they make. Another pro tip. So this is kind of a random one that people have said for, critique debates and, agree somewhat, disagree somewhat, but it's like you kind of want to say the exact opposite of the thing that they said. So it's like if the language that they use, and let's say, especially in cases where you don't know what's going on. So like, let's say you're reading the Virilio case, and at this point in camp, you're still like, no clue. Like I have no idea what this case says. Okay. Easy rule of thumb is one, you should mimic the language that they're using. So if their evidence is like, the sort of uniqueness claim of how the world is structured is based off of speed. Okay. It's like, and you're like, that's sort of what I got. It's like, the next step that you do is that you should take their exact language and then say the exact opposite. So you should be like, the world is not structured through speed, right? It's like, even if you're like vaguely there, like you're not really sure what exactly you're saying, it kind of sounds like you're doing the line by line because you're saying literally what they said and then added the word not, right? So it's like, that is sort of like a thing that you kind of want to do with block writing. Like it should not just be the same set of things. Okay. Talked about why people don't like blocks. Let's talk a little bit about how you approach the process of block writing. And there's a multi-step process that you should take. This is sort of the same steps that I take when I put together blocks for, teams that I'm coaching. First, you should write blocks as modules, not scripts. Okay. You should write blocks as modules, not scripts. I think the biggest mistake people make is to treat blocks like they're long scripts that they read. So like, remember, like this is policy debate. This is not original oratory. So you don't just give the same like 6-minute speech or 8-minute speech every debate and then spend like 2 minutes on the line by line saying that's above, right? Like this isn't a speech activity. In fact, we have a whole slew of events that cater to memorizing and then just giving the speech, right? I think novices also make this mistake too by having things that are like Like, remember like when, back in the old days when you used to have like a little 2AC case overview that basically just like re-described the entirety of the case before you went and answered the argument? Like that, I think, sort of has trickled into, some parts of your varsity debating too. So like imagine like your 2NC overview that you read on like a DA that just like explains the DA again and then like doesn't really add a whole lot. It's like those are scripts. Those are not modulars, right? And you sort of want to think about that principle for each set of arguments. So it's like it should not be the case pretty much in any debate that you have like a script that you read and then you do the line by line. So it's like the biggest one that I've seen is like Topicality. Like you'll have a script that's like 2.5 minutes long, sometimes like 6 minutes long if you're like pretty bad. It's like you'll read and read and read, and then you'll be like, okay, there's like 12 arguments on the line by line that I'm going to now answer now, right? It's like that should not be the case. It should be the case, in fact, that you've changed your block, you've modified it so that now it reflects the order of the arguments that were made, okay? I think a lot of advanced people make sort of the same mistake with 2ACs that are titled something like 2AC midterms DA, right? It's like, why is 2AC midterms DA not a useful block for you? Feel free to blurt out. So I have a block in my file that's titled 2AC midterms. What's wrong with that block? Yeah, so, for a lot of agenda DAs, there are a lot of unique scenarios. So it's like being like 2AC agenda DA is like unworkable, right? It's like which one? Like BBB, like gun control, like what are we talking about here, right? The other, what were you going to add something? Yeah, like the other question I might ask is like which direction, right? It's like, what do you mean 2AC? But like, is it like Dems good or Dems bad? What are we really doing here, right? So it's like it doesn't make sense to have like big 2AC dash midterms DA. It's like that's not very helpful to you. Same thought about the critique. It's like 2AC Virilio. It's like that doesn't really help you because most teams, right, and probably in your experience debating K teams, their K is probably not just Virilio, at least not in the 2NC, right? So it's like might have a Virilio card in the 1NC. My guess is that they'll also include some security cards. They might include some cards about gender, might include some cards about race. And they'll be like, oh, you dropped this part of the argument. So it's like instead, the sort of way you want to think about block writing is that you should have little modules that sort of set up different arguments for you. So you might have like something that's like 2AC dash plan popular or 2AC dash, BBB dash uniqueness, right? So it's like you have stuff that's specific that you can sort of put together. And you kind of want to think of blocks as like they're basically like Lego pieces that you like put together and then submit, as opposed to like a fully formed product that you read every single time. Okay. Does that distinction make sense to everybody in terms of just like what they need to be doing there? Okay. I'll give you sort of an example and let me see if my computer works. Okay. All right. So. Sorry, small technical difficulties. All right. So let's say that here's sort of an example of an affirmative file that we put together last year. So yeah, sure. Okay. So one thing that you might kind of notice is, so this is an affirmative that we had put together. It was about critical infrastructure. I think we basically said that we should stop cyber attacks on dams. Okay. The way that I kind of organize the files to begin with is it's not just one giant file titled affirmative, right? Or aff dash critical infrastructure. Why do you think I did that? Yeah. Yeah, that file will be huge. In fact, my guess is that most of your computers are working suboptimally because you have 12 files open. Imagine if one of the files was 2 megabytes. It's like unworkable. It's not going to open, or it's going to crash all of your Word. This is probably the reason why you're like, whoops, I need tech time. It's like I can't scroll through my doc. It's like, yeah, like I would guess, like if I added all these docs together, it'd be like 2 megs. So like obviously it would not open, right? So it's like I've sort of subdivided them into components. It's like I have a set of 1ACs that I can read. I have a set of arguments that I would be making for case. I have a set of arguments for DAs, counterplans. This was probably not that advised. I don't know why we have K addendum and K addendum 2, probably based on tournaments, but it's like that's sort of the way that we put it together. Then like we have answers to T and other procedurals. Yeah. Pretty much, and then you just X out of them as soon as they're relevant. And that usually helps because it's like if you have like 10 docs open that are like 50 kilobytes, it's not about to delete your computer. If you have like 10 docs open that are all each like half a meg or like a full megabyte, it's like not gonna happen for you. Right. So it's like that's sort of what I try to do when putting that together. So to give you an example of how you might modularize a block. Okay, so this is the blocks that we had for counterplans for this infra. Okay, so like the way that we put this together is like, this is sort of a bad example, right? Where I'm like 2AC CP dash states, right? Where it's like clearly written just for one state's counterplan. But it's like, I sort of tried to make this file in such a way that I could pull different pieces from different places. So it's like, there's some condo hat, there's a competition hat where there's like different definitions. Why do I have a competition for counterplans? Like, what is this for? Yeah, perm do the counterpoint, right? So when teams are trying to make consult arguments, it's like I can go through and be like, okay, they said resolved, they said should, they said substantially, and then like just drop all those arguments, right? Similar thoughts about sort of how I've put together. I'm going to skip the states counterpoint because I don't think that was a very good example, but like you sort of have different modular blocks for different pieces, right? So it's like I have a modular block for the guidance counterplan, which was a pretty common counterplan that was read last year. I also put together some stuff that was answers to like, made arguments that were like links to the net benefit, right? It's like, it's not always the case that the guidance counterplan is paired with the politics net benefit. That's sort of the reason why I've separated it out, right? And have a different block that I can put in, right? Similar thought about, we'll talk a little bit about 1AR blocks in a second, but it's like, I've also included some 1AR blocks to arguments that we likely will extend that need some precise language. So like, arguments like perm do the counterpoint. Oh, that's a bad block because clearly somebody was writing over it. Maybe let's do sad. Classic though. Okay, so it's like there was a bunch of debates in which people read the court's counterpoint. We needed to talk about whether it linked to the politics net benefit very specifically. So it's like I had a specific thing and then I had a card. So it's like I put together some 1AR blocks too, not for every single argument because that's kind of tough, but it's like 1AR blocks to arguments that I'm likely to read, right? And that's kind of the way that I've organized it. So it's like, I have, a section that's titled agent. I don't just have something that says 2AC agent counterplan. And then I have some bits for like pieces that I can put together. So it's like they might say their agent is Congress. They might say their agent was courts. They might say their agent was executive. And it's like they might say that they might say that politics is a net benefit. So it's like I have some 2AC links to net politics net benefit, right? So it's like that's kind of the way that you want to put together a file, is that you want to sort of put together blocks in such a way that they're modular. Does that make sense to everybody in terms of just like this example? We'll return back to some of this file stuff in a second. But okay. So returning back, so modules, not scripts. Second, you want to write blocks for commonly anticipated arguments, okay? You want to write blocks for commonly anticipated arguments. For the AF, it means a couple of things, okay? You should have 2AC blocks to common off-case positions. So you saw that counterplan file. It's like it has 2ACs to, the way that we sort of put it together is it had 2ACs to every argument that was produced at a camp, and it had 2ACs to arguments that we had heard during the year, okay? The reason why one of the states counterplan blocks, 2AC states counterplan version 6, was that was the 6th tournament we had attended, and that was the 6th revision of the states counterplan, right? So it's like, it has 2ACs to things that you're likely to debate, okay? The next set of things that you want is you want sort of 1AR extensions. So again, a 1AR extension should not be a script that extends every card in order, okay? What's that? What's that? No, I said that you sort of want a 1AR extension that does not extend every single card that you had in the 2AC. You instead want sort of a 1AR extension that has little modules of arguments that sort of extend certain pieces, right? So give, for example, in fact, returning back to the document, right? Give, for example, the state's counterpoint. It's like the state's counterpoint, you might have had a bunch of different responses in the 2AC, right? So like this version 5, yeah. Okay, so version 6 of the state's counterpoint. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It had like 5 arguments that were extended in the 2AC. The likelihood that you extend all 5, pretty low, right? It's like you probably don't have that time, and that was probably extended with a bunch of different arguments. So it is extremely unlikely that you're going to extend all. So it's like you want to create sort of 1AR blocks that extend things modularly. So it's like, let's say that in this debate, I want to extend perm to both. I thought the federal facilities deficit was a dud. I thought, uniform was a dud, preemption was a dud, and well, that's not that many arguments. But it's like, I have 1AR perm to both, where it's like you can just read the permutation block, where it's like, let's say that I picked like there's a modeling net benefits. Like I have like an answer to a modeling argument. It's like the reason why I wrote that particular block is because I thought that that deficit was an argument that we could go for pretty regularly. So to give you just sort of a brief insight into what this AF did, it's like the AF protected critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. And we had an advantage too that was pretty bad. That said something like the way that we protect our critical infrastructure will get modeled by like NATO and NORAD, basically alliances that center the United States, because they all will use sort of the same training manual functionally to like protect their dams. So we had a set of arguments that's like, well, the thing is only the Defense Department would get modeled because Defense Departments talk to each other about these training manuals. Obviously, we're not like, NORAD is not talking to California. Like California is not a member of NORAD. Like that doesn't really make sense. So we had a deficit that was like, the modeling stuff only happens federally. Okay, that was the sort of brief. So it's like, we thought that was a pretty good argument against the state's counterplan. And so we've written out a state's counterplan sort of deficit that extends the initial 2AC arguments. It's like, blah, blah, can't solve modeling. They don't have a flanker card saying 50 states can replace defense departments. And then the other thing you might notice is that I've also included cards in the 1AR. Okay. One of the things about 1AR blocks that I think people miss is that it'll just be rote recitations of things that were already in the 2AC, and that's it. That's a waste of time. Because like there's no like you didn't add anything that made it difficult for the 2NR. If you're a 2N, I would imagine that the hardest debates that you've been in are debates in which 1AR read a bunch of cards, right? The reason why that's true is because you've already anticipated the stuff that they're just going to say again in the 2AC because you can just reread the 2NC. But it's like the things that they've read cards for in you, it's like now you have to relook at the card, see if the card's any good, make sure if you can go for the counterplan. So in this case, it's like we saved our best 1AR card that's like a tanks modeling into the 1AR. Because like this card was talking about like foreign affairs doctrine and military in the states not being able to do it. That ended up in the 1AR. Okay, it's like you should have blocks that insert sort of pieces of evidence that you want to read on a particular issue. And the sort of goal is, a 1AR block doesn't just extend a 2AC, right? It should also develop vertically, should develop a set of arguments vertically that sort of help establish an argument as something that you can go for. So in this case, it's like, I would want the team that was reading this to extend like the modeling deficit is like the key feature of their 1AR. And then it's like they've vertically developed it by making the 2AC, answering follow-on, which is a common response to the argument. And then it's like they've read one card, they've read 2 cards. So it's like now it's dead. The state's counterplan is unworkable, right? So it's like that's kind of the way that you want to sort of establish block writing for the affirmative. Do I have a neg example that shows? Okay. Yeah. Might go back a little while. I think this, let's see, was this the arms sales topic? Nope, that was the immigration topic. Oof, classic. Should be somewhere in here. Okay, maybe not. Well, in any case, let's talk a little bit about the neg. I was looking for a particular case neg that we had written a long time ago, but clearly my Dropbox is not organized. Okay, so for the neg, a few things that I would write. So it's like, obviously you have a 1NC shell. Some of your blocks should include, you should have 2NC blocks and some core extensions, right? So if you're putting together a 2NC block for T, it's like the thing that I would really want written would be like the 2NC extension of your limits argument, right? So it's like you should have some arguments that include like what a case list would be, why limits are important, right? The reason why I sort of pick that argument as opposed to anything else is like that's the core offensive argument you're extending. And usually it has to be pretty precise, right? So when you're extending topicality, it's like one of the things you'll probably hear from judges is like, we didn't understand like what cases you included and excluded, like you didn't have a case list. So it's like that's something that I would write down before I gave it, because it's like you really want a precise way to extend that. Or, if it's a DA, it's like you probably need a 2NC link wall, right? Like a link extension that extends a number of different arguments. If you're writing a counterplan, it's like your counterplan, you should probably have a 2NC like AT perm to the counterplan block, because it's like that's a common argument that people would read. Okay. You should have sort of 2NC blocks, not only to sort of your core extensions, but also your common answers. So it's like if you're reading the security K and don't have a block titled AT threats are real, it's like tough. Not really sure that you prepared a security K. It's like sounds like you only prepared a 1NC, right? You want to make sure you have stuff to answer common arguments. You should also have, so it's like that's usually the bare minimum. Additional things that you can do. You should have 2NC blocks to commonly read cards. Okay. After a certain point of time, there's only a finite number of cards people will read against your off-case positions that make any sense. So it's like, if you're reading the Virilio K, there are only so many people out there in the world talking about Virilio. You might have noticed that you don't have, just like normal conversations with your friends about Virilio. People are not like mom and dad don't know who Virilio are. The reason why is because obviously Virilio is like a very niche author writing in the context of very specific things. So it's like there aren't thousands of people talking about Virilio. Right. So that kind of means like the AF answers, there's only so many things people are going to say that have the word Virilio in them. In fact, my guess is that a majority of them got read in the K demo debate that you watched the other day. Right. So it's like, given that, you should be able to write like blocks that are like AT author and like specifically answers the card that you're about to debate. Right. Similar thought about like the Cap K. There are a lot of cards about capitalism, but teams will just sort of copy paste each other's blocks or copy paste each other's 2ACs. So the cards that people read are very similar. So it's like the cap sustainable, like, key to warming card. I think everybody reads the same card in the debate community, even though there's plenty of cards that have been updated since, right? It's usually because it's easy and like, you know how to explain that card you already have. So it's like, there are a certain set of cards where it's like, you should obviously just put it together. Or if you're debating the same set of cards, that's an indication that's like, oh, like I should put together some blocks of specific cards that people are reading. Okay. You should also have some 2NR extensions. Okay, so when you're writing 2NR or 2AR blocks, okay, and some people do this, it should not be a stock speech that you literally just give every 2NR. So it's like, you should not just show up and be like, here's my paragraph that I read before every 2NR, and like, cool, like, here's the K overview, right? I think instead, you should, and also the other thing is, you shouldn't write 2NR blocks to like every possible argument, largely because you have a finite amount of time. Like, you do not have like minutes in your life to like dedicate to writing every 2NR possible argument that could come up for every possible genre of argument. Impossible, right? So it's like the things that I would write 2NR blocks for would be things that would be very difficult to just verbalize on the spot that need to be written in a very precise way. Example is perm to the counterplan, right? It's like the very technical way of describing why their permutation, is illegitimate requires a very specific way of writing, right? Like I can't just like come up and be like, perm to the counterplan. It's like, they're functionally severance and just like talk out of my ass for a while, right? It's like unlike certain arguments where it's like that's possible. It's like that's one where it's like, like not a great place to be. Like another one, and this is not a neg example, but like if you all have debated Afro-pessimism, my guess is that you've probably read this Gordon card in every debate, right? It's like there's very specific language in that Gordon card that you kind of want to mimic in your debates, right? So it's like, the failure to understand failure, or arguments like specific progress examples that are in there about like Shirley Chisholm to like Barack Obama. It's like those are things that you sort of want to like mimic the language of the card in your block. So it's like that requires an extension in your future rebuttals that's very specific. Like I shouldn't just go up and be like, extend the Gordon. Like here's some stuff that I'm going to say about it. It's like, my guess is that version of your extension is like only okay, right? The best version of a 2NR block anticipate how the 1AR phrases an argument, but also how it might shift. I'll repeat that again. Best versions of a 2NR block anticipate how the 1AR phrases an argument, but also how it might shift, right? So I showed you sort of the example of that states counterplan block. The states counterplan, the 2AC deficit that had like that modeling thing was like one sentence. Like in the 2AC, it was just like, modeling deficit, our cards say the federal government's necessary, defense departments cooperate, California is not part of NATO. It's like, that was it. The 1AR block was like, obviously California is not part of NATO. We have a card that says foreign affairs federalism done by the states is terrible. And then we have another card that says modeling will lead to catastrophe causing nuclear war. It's like, the thing that you kind of want to anticipate when putting together a 2NR block is like, how is that 2AC fragment going to change into a full, complete 1AR argument, right? And a 2NR block should try to anticipate the way that people will try to read your evidence and try to respond to it. That also sort of dovetails with the idea of like your blocks are modular and constantly changing, right? So it's like, obviously not every team will read the 1AR extension the same way. So it's like the way that you write the block might be pretty different from debate to debate. Okay. Yeah. The sort of next set of things I kind of want to talk about is just like, what should a block look like? Okay. What should a block look like? First, there should not be any big rants. There should not be a block that's titled 2NC overview that lasts you more than 1 minute. There should not be an unhinged rant where you just like talk about why the state's bad for like 2.5 minutes, right? Especially if you're reading a K. You want to sort of avoid any rant style blocks, and most blocks, my suggestion is if it's going over a minute, it's too scripted, right? It's like you need to reduce that script and then create a different module if you're making a minute worth of arguments, right? Less than a minute is sort of the general goal that you want to achieve. And generally speaking, I would say like 30 seconds per module. Like it should not be the case that you're spending lots of time on each module, okay? There's a very specific argument format by which your block should be formatted. So returning back to, the 2AC thing that I was showing you earlier, it's like, you might have noticed a few things about the blocks that, if I can plug this in, are reflected across the file. In that, a few things. It's like, everything is formatted kind of in the same way, okay? It should not, this might just seem like an aesthetic stickler point, but it's like, blocks, readability is really important. So it's like you want to be pretty consistent with the way that you have things in your block. It's like if you're numbering, it's like your numbering should go the entire way. I should not stop at like 1, 2, 3 and then not have the rest of the things be numbered, right? The fonts are all the same. So it's not like, a lot of times you'll write blocks that you've copy pasted cards from other people and then so your fonts are like hot nonsense. It's like that sucks. It's actually kind of hard to read and usually stumble for that reason. It's like all of your fonts should be kind of the same. Every card is formatted in the exact same way. So it's like, you'll find like every card looks like, the citation is bolded. There's not an apostrophe before the thing. Every card has sort of like parentheses that are normal. The paragraph integrity is kept. It's like, that doesn't necessarily have to be true for everybody, but it's like every card in the file has the same format. Okay. It's like, that might seem a little anal retentive, but it's like, you do want it to sort of be structured in a way that's like easy to read. Okay. You might also notice that in this file, maybe, I think all the highlighting is also the same, right? It's like, I think it's all green. And then one thing that's a little bit different is, I'll show you the weird half-written block. It's like perm to the counterpoint block. Yeah, okay. So it's like, this block looks like a lot of yikes, right? The thing that sort of we tend to do in our block writing is that we have like little color highlights to basically describe things that you need to do next. So it's like, for us, we usually put red highlighting as sort of like an insert, like you need to do something here, like that's not written, that changes the block. And then we usually use purple highlighting for stuff that's like not necessary, but it's like you could read if you had additional time. So it's like, in this case, when I'm extending perm to the counterplan, the 1AR, it's like, yeah, I should probably start with like perm to the counterplan. I might start with the arg that's like counterplans have to be textually and functionally competitive. I have like things to say there, right? And then I have like a framing issue that like is like, only one word needs to imply uncertainty for the whole sentence to be uncertain. Okay, it's like, okay, that's like the thing that I say in every debate. Okay, the next set of things, it's like, obviously depends as to what sort of arguments they're reading. So like the next thing in red highlighting, you'll notice, it's like insert all relevant definitions from the competition header. It's like, that is asking me to delete that section and then just like add a bunch of definitions, or I put answer stupid args in order. The reason why I put that in there is like a lot of times people, when making perm to the counterplan things, will add like a bunch of extraneous crap to like make sure or hope that you drop it, so that they can go for their thing. So it's like, that's what I mean by stupid args here. It's like, yeah, you want to answer the arguments that they made in the perm to the counterplan thing in order, right? No, I cannot anticipate every single one or what order in which they'll be, or what, you know, words they used for them. But it's like, it gives you instructions of what to do next. And that's kind of the thing you sort of want to do for 1AR and 2AR blocks, is like, you might have an initial thing that you're going to say, right? So it's like, yeah, perm to the counterpoint, these two sentences, I'm going to say it. But like the rest of the block is written in such a way where it's like very easy to sort of like add things in. And it's like telling you what specifically you have to do during prep for this 1AR perm to the counterpoint block to be relevant. The other thing that's like kind of necessary here is like, if you think that, you know, a certain set of arguments they made is better than the others, it's like, let's say their perm to the counterpoint answers were quite good and you couldn't find, you know, all the cards say security, cooperation, like must be binding and genuine, and like, you know, they have to be that case all the time. It's like, well, perm to the counterpoint doesn't look so great anymore. So it's like, that should be a pretty good indication to you. It's like, once you've looked at this block and you're trying to insert stuff and you're like, oh, like, I actually don't have a counter definition of security cooperation. It's like, oh yeah, maybe not going for the perm to the counterpoint. Right. So it's like, you want to write the block in a way that sort of helps put that together, like sort of strategically in your mind as you sort of go through the speeches. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that block can go. Okay. Blocks are modules with a collection of arguments. Okay. Blocks are modules with a collection of arguments. It means that the way that you are arguing needs to be identical every single time. Okay. The way that you're arguing needs to be identical every single time. It's really hard to flow blocks that are written in paragraphs. So like, this is usually a K thing, but it's like, if you're like, you know, reform is bad and you speak in a large essay about like how reform was bad, it's like, that's really hard to flow. Like, you probably had that experience, like listening to a K debater being like, no idea where you are. Like literally you're just talking. It's like, instead you want to sort of make standard, not only that, so it's like, I made like the stickler point about like fonts and colors or whatever. It's like, that's less important. The more important thing is that you want to make the argument in the exact same way each time. So like, the thing that I tell sort of like my debaters is to sort of use the following. You should start with an argument label. Okay, just start with an argument label. Then the next thing that you should have is a claim. Then you should have the word because if you don't have a because after that, it means that your argument is lacking a warrant, right? After the because, you should be like, that's awful. Okay. That should be the structure of every argument that you make, right? And it's like, anytime you make an argument in the block, it should be structured in that identical way. So like, for example, let's say I'm doing perm to the counterplan stuff again, right? I'll be like, you know, perm to the counterplan, 3 responses. 1, argument label, probably something like, it's functionally severance, explanation, card maybe. 2, textually severance, you know, resolve means certain, card, right? It's like, it's in the same way, so it's like easy to flow because it's exactly the same, you know, sort of format and function of the arguments that are made. Numbering, it's important. It keeps things organized. It keeps things flowable. It also makes your later speeches a lot easier because you can say things like, if you made 3 arguments and the 1AR answered 2, it's very easy to be like, oh, they dropped argument 1 and 3, right? It's like, you know, numbering the arguments makes it very easy, especially if you're going to be reading blocks. It's like, you want to keep things as organized as possible, right? So yeah, it helps to use numbering. Okay, final sort of section that I kind of want to talk about before I take some questions is, how do I use blocks in a debate? So it's like, I talked a little bit about how judges hate them. So it's like, there is a particular way that you can use them to make it sound good, okay? The first is, the end goal is to be not using blocks, but the goal is that you have internalized the blocks that you've written, okay? The goal is that you've internalized the blocks that you've written. You've written down your thoughts on a piece of paper. You found or, you know, on a computer. Sorry, this was written a long time ago. You have found a way to polish them and make them concise, right? And you found sort of the exact way you want to say them. You might have noticed, like, I don't know how many top debaters that you've watched in person, probably maybe not a lot, but it's like the top debaters look like they're not reading blocks. Like, they just kind of like bring up their flows and debate, and then they just like debate off their flow and their computer's still back there, okay? The thing that they're doing is, it's not so much that they're not reading blocks, okay? That's kind of the weird sort of trick. The trick is that they've basically read the block so many times that they don't need to bring up their computer anymore. They can just give the speech because they've largely memorized their blocks. That doesn't mean like you should like word by word memorize everything, but it's like they've memorized kind of like the set of things that they're going to say in the order that they're going to say them, which is why they're able to bring them up. So when I say the end goal is not to use blocks, it's like the way you do that is by writing your blocks, right? So it's like you write blocks, you internalize them, you figure out how to specifically say the thing you're going to say, and then it's like the end goal is that you get to the point where it's like you don't even need to bring your computer to recite the blocks into existence, right? Like that's sort of the reason why the top debaters sound so good. It's not like they're geniuses that like are like impromptu like 400 word people per minute speaking machines. Like that doesn't exist. Like that. Sorry. Like maybe one or two of them, but like not that's not a common thing. Like most folks, the reason why they sound like that is because they've written it, figured out like the pacing of their block. They've really practiced the way that they speak their block. So that's the second thing that I like to talk about with how to use blocks is obviously it's not going to happen immediately. Like you're not going to be able to just like come up without a computer and have memorized all of your blocks to all of your arguments, right? So it's like instead, sort of in the interim, when you're reading your blocks, the thing that you want to avoid is you don't want to sound like DebateBot 2000, right? Like you don't want to sound like you're a robot that's just like processing and then like same speed, same 300 words per minute, same extremely unclear. So, okay. Some things that you want to do. First, you should bring up your flows. Even if you're not going to look at them, it helps because it looks like at least you showed up to debate the arguments in the order that they're presented. I do recommend looking at the flows, but if you insist, like if you're like, I'm definitely not going to ever look at these flows, like you should still bring them up because it looks like you've at least, pretended as if you're going to answer the arguments, right? It also helps like, not drop args. So like on the flow, it says condo, like in big red and in circles. It's like, yeah, like time to answer conditionality if you didn't include it in your block, right? It's like it like a lot of times block readers, the thing that they lose at is that they'll like forget something. So they'll be like, oh shit, I forgot my block to conditionality, so I dropped it. Right. It's like you should have your flows up with you so you're like, okay, just double checking before I like now that I've read all this stuff, double checking that I have things, that I didn't drop. Okay. The second is you should practice your blocks. You should practice reading your blocks. And the thing that you want to practice for is you don't want to do sort of the speaking drill thing where you're just reading as fast as you possibly can. You should practice for persuasion. Okay. You should practice for persuasion. And the thing that you kind of want to do is the worst block readers read in monotone. Like they'll be like, at the top, economic decline is blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, it's like fine. Like it might be clear, but it's like it's very easy to know that like you've gone into drone mode. Like you'll hear people like kind of go into that drone voice and you're like, oh, they're reading a block. Like time to check out, basically, right? And the thing that you really want to do is you want to be persuasive when you're reading the block. That kind of means a few things. You might write in like persuasion inflection points into your block. So, I guess I probably should not have closed the affirmative file, but like one of the things that you might have noticed there is infrastructure. Okay. Okay. So it's like here's an example of what I mean by like inflection points that you might put into your block. So like when I'm writing blocks, you might notice that a lot of the like so this is clearly an analytic, right? I've underlined certain words that I wanted like a little bit more persuasively said in a debate with emphasis. So like instead of reading this as, 2AC, 2 federal facilities, deficit states are prohibited, regulating federal deficit for fractional, it's like that's unflowable. It's like 2AC, federal facilities deficit states are prohibited from regulating federal dams for a factual statement from the Association of State Dam Officials. Counterplans unwinnable without a blank transferring authority for BOR, blah, 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 right? It's like, you want to sort of practice your blocks and write in sort of places where you want emphasis so that when you're giving the speech, it's easier to basically be more persuasive, right? In fact, the block even tells you where to be persuasive, right? That's kind of the thing that's like pretty nice about sort of block writing. It's like you can sort of put that in to begin with, okay? You also want to sort of pace yourself such that you sound human, okay? So it's like the difference between like the first spread and the second spread is like the other one sounded, one of them sounded like I was literally just like being inputted words and then like output the text back. The other one sounded as if I was speaking. It's because, partly the, persuasion bit, it's like take breaths where there's punctuation. You should emphasize words. You underline words that you need to be emphasized. Okay. It's like that's kind of the thing that you want to do. Finally, okay, so it's like once you've gotten a hang of it, so like maybe you've debated the state's counterplan 20 times. So like the federal facilities deficit is like a thing that you've largely memorized, or you can kind of give, not like perfectly, but it's like, yeah, like you have the idea, right? The next step is to try to look away from your computer as you're giving the 2A, or sorry, the 1AR block. So it's like 1AR and 2AR. It's like the thing that like really changes sort of a debate, especially when you're in person, is that you're looking at the judge. Okay. So like in Zoom debate, it actually did not matter that you were looking at the judge at all. In fact, no one was looking at the judge. They were just looking at their doc, right? And it's like you couldn't really tell because like the camera is just kind of on you in the general direction of. It's like you weren't like intently staring at the camera like this, right? Like that would be pretty creepy. Instead, like usually, like when you're in person, like the judge is a like a living human being that is like, you know, being hostage, you know, taken hostage to your debate, right? So it's like they're like this. So it's like the thing that you kind of want to do is you want to make it like clear that you're paying attention to them as much as you're like they're paying attention to you. So like being able to like look at them, right? Just like in any other speech activity, like not policy debate speech activity, just like any other speech activity, right? It's like eye contact is important. It's like eye contact actually in policy debate is pretty important too. So like places where arguments are really important, I like to look at a judge and speak to them as if I am speaking to them giving the argument, right? While for the rest of it, I feel like I can drone on. So it's like, let's say in this case, it's like I thought the federal facilities deficit was most important. I really want to be able to connect to somebody and speak the federal facilities deficit into me. And like they're looking at me, and we both know that's an important argument because we're looking at each other, right? While other places I might just be like, yeah, whatever, like firm to both, like, you know, conditionality, it's good, like we're bad or whatever it is you're doing. It's like that stuff is like less relevant, but like you want to make sort of moments of judge connection. And that's something that you want to do while looking away from your block. Or even if it means like you have to look back at your block for a second, you want to like look back at the judge. Right. It's like that's kind of an important part of getting speaker points higher, you know, making it look like that you're engaged. A lot of times like you'll sort of see like your judge reacting to that argument, which is like a pretty good indicator of how it's going. So like I'm speaking to Nora, I'm speaking to federal facilities deficit. Nora's like unworkable. Like this is shit. Like obviously the states can just do this. It's like I've looked at Nora, she's like looking at me disappointedly. I'm like, all right, it's time to maybe move on to something else and maybe try to win the debate somewhere else. Right. It's like that those are cues that you can like kind of get from your in-person debates that you can't really get in your online debates. And it's like that's kind of the reason why you want to look away when you're reading your blocks as opposed to just reading straight down. Okay. Cool. Do folks have any questions about block writing, how you might do them, tips and tricks for whatever you do? Yeah. Are you talking perspective of the app? Yeah. I think you want warrants, but here's a trick that 2NRs really don't like about the 1AR. The way that you want to sort of do it in the 1AR is that you should just have basically what I like to call a list. So it's like, let's say that you're trying to extend the argument that like there's, you know, that let's see, China relations are you know inevitably deleted because of a bunch of all causes. It's like the 1AR extension of that. So like card might just say card in the 2AC says alt cause to China, you know, blah blah, right? And then like card. 1AR is you sort of just want to list the warrants as opposed to really explaining them. So I might be so if I might, for example, it might be like 2AC9, all causes to China relations, trade war, comma, like economic sanctions, comma, like military stuff in the Senkaku. That's author. And then like the 2AR might be like all causes, they dropped all of our list. One was, you know, the trade war, sentence or two explanation. Two was economic sanctions, sentence or two explanation. Three, you know, military stuff in the Senkaku's sentence explanation. Right. So it's like the thing that got developed there is like the warrant is there. You can't tell me that I did not say the words like, you know, Senkaku or like, you know, trade war, but it's like the thing that they wrote down is probably just those words. And then it's like the 2AR now is like, yeah, I dropped it. Like 1AR clearly said quote, trade war. And then it's like you've now re-explained the thing in great depth, right? So it's like that's kind of the way that I like when I'm like, these warrants are a little too long, like I'll just sort of like comma it in. And that's kind of the way that I like, you know, it's like biggish in the 2AC. The 1AR is like truncated, and then the 2AR is like justifiably did say the word trade war. So I can now extrapolate some stuff, a sentence or two about that, right? Seems a little shady, agreed. But it's like, if there's no warrant at all, if I was just like all cause to China relations, that's it. It's like judge less likely to give you leeway. But if you're able to then be like 1AR said, quote, this, what they meant was functionally, don't say what they meant was, but it's like re-explain the thing that they meant. It's like then it's like sounds a lot more legitimate when you're sort of doing that. If that makes sense. Yeah. Meh. I mean, to be fair, it's not like the 2AC usually reads cards that are like 3 sub-point all causes, right? It's like usually just like 1 all cause. And usually it's just tagged all cause to China war, period. Maybe there's like some stuff going on there, but like that's kind of the case usually. So it's like, you know, 2AC all cause to China war card, 1AR all cause to China war dash warrants in a list form, 2AR all cause to China war, 1 warrant, explanation, 2 warrant, explanation, 3 warrant. Explanation is like a there's like a logical growth to the thing that you've established. And like kind of makes it seem like it's not new, which is sort of the way they would do it. Now, one caveat to that, if all cost to China war was like the central theme of the argument that you really needed to win, then I would not do that. I would have a full warrant. So it's like in this case, the reason why federal facilities like that deficit looked like there was a paragraph is because I was like, oh, this is something that we could probably win. So then it's like that had a developed paragraph, so no judge can look back at me and be like dog, like you just had like 3 like listed things. Like it's not really an argument, right? As opposed to like if I'm just trying to time pressure the 2NR, it's like I can just blitz a bunch of these and be like, there are warrants, so like I can extend them, so they're dangerous, but it's like they're not so dangerous that they're endangering my 1AR's ability to get speech, right? So it's like you want to sort of like be sort of on the line, and you know this is sort of why people are like 2AR cheating, 1AR is largely cheating too. It's like you can kind of be on the line and be like, yeah, you know, I did say the thing, and I did say the things that would maybe make me think of the warrants that could exist, right? It's like if you ask a judge like, what did you write down? The likelihood of what they wrote down is they probably did write down all cause 1, like you know Senkaku 2, whatever. So it's like you can very easily be like, look back, like, we even like numbered them like 1, 2, and 3, right? So it's like, and then it's like the judge memory hazy, so it's like they'll look back and they'll be like, yeah. So it's like that's kind of usually what ends up. So yeah, sorry, this turned into how to cheat as opposed to how to write a block, but fair enough. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I guess for like block it's like you're going to be speaking a lot, not a lot of parts that you can see. How do you feel about like building the game inefficiency? Do you like respond a lot to like next and judge listen? Judge listen needs to be removed from the vocabulary. It actually makes me actively not want to listen. I think you could write in and, although I think the better version of this and just more mechanical version is numbers. So it's like you don't need to say and or next if you're saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or they say, right? It's like that's the easier way to do it, in my opinion. I don't think that you want to add random inefficiencies. Like you just want to make your thing flowable, right? So it's like if you have a number and the other team dropped something, then it's very clear that that number is like, you know, so like let's say I said 1, 2, and 3, I was flowing and I'm bad at flowing, maybe. It's like I wrote down like the arg, and then it's like I didn't really get most of your stuff, but I did hear you say 1, 2, and 3, so I wrote down 1, 2, and 3. It's like that is fine because then when the 2NR is like, remember that argument number 2 that they dropped, and then you re-explain the argument, the judge is going to be like, I didn't get that, but I did get number 2, so you probably did say that, right? So it's like the number that you do want a number in such a way, and that like helps add that back in. And next, like I don't think you really need it. There's not really a reason to put it in. Yeah. What does a case extension look like in the 1AR? I might actually be able to show you an example of said case extension. That's up to you. I think that that's one area where it's like I think you can probably do it on autopilot. as opposed to blocking it out. We did write something like that. So it's like we did have a 2AC. So it's like, you know, like how normally you'll have a 2AC impact thing that you'll say. So it's like water CIs weak to terror, whatever, caused extinction. It's like we had a sentence that we said in the 2AC. And then like we had a couple of versions of this where it's like the 1AR dropped a particular. So actually you might notice. So this is the thing that I just talked about. So the 2AC, I was like, water. So this was like 3 scenarios. One second. So I was like, water CIs weak to terror. The plan hardens them. Bioterror grid and water shortage cause extinction, period. It's like, is that a real argument? Like, not really, but I did say bioterror grid and water shortage. And it's like the 1AR can then be like, let's say you drop grid. It's like, I'm not extending all of them. I'm just going to be like, drop grid, collapse, cause extinction, blah, 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 blah. Right. It's like, that's kind of the way that you would write it out. Or, you know, in this case, I did not write like 1AR extensions to every little bit of argument. Like, for example, it's like AT, no bioterror. It's like, no, I did not. I wrote a 2AC thing. I did not write a 1AR. You should be able to just give it, I think. You should also be able to, if you're like, I feel really unconfident doing that, you can take the 2AC block, modify it a tiny bit so it's shorter, and then like re-give it basically. But like that's a thing that like we wrote in because we're like, we debate this literally every debate. Somebody has an impact defense card that says bioterror, you know, no motive and or like terrorist don't have text. It's like, yeah, we might as well write it out, right? So it's like that's written out for the 2AC. Must you have it for the 1AR not? So yeah.
Like, when do you see it? It's like on the line at the end.
When do you say what?
Let's say you're in the way. When do you?
You don't give a case extensions at the top. Remember, you want to sort of like build it into the line by line as naturally as possible. So it's like it looks bad when you're like 40 seconds of stuff I'm saying at the top. Now answers to whatever, right? You want to take your blocks apart and like put them next to the things. So it's like if they're saying no bioterror, it's like I should take the block that says no bioterror and like move the thing down there. Or if like the impact of grid is somewhere else, it's like, yeah, the impact of grid is going where the impact of the grid is, not at the top. Here's the impact of the grid where we say a bunch of stuff. Right. So it's like you want to make it seem as natural as possible, which means you need to break apart your blocks and put them in the natural places as opposed to just reading the script. Yep. Yeah. Ev comparison you want to do more specifically, and it's like that also develops more, right? So 2AC has no Ev comparison because you're not comparing evidence. 1AR, like you should keep it short, so it shouldn't be like a long sentence. Like I would just be like, you know, the gold's like, so like this is another place where it's like I say very little and then I say a lot more later. So like in the 1AR, it might be like the gold standard is recency. Like, you know, and like just that statement after I've explained the thing. And then the 2AR, I could be like the, you know, drop gold standard is recency. This negative card was from this date. Way like our card is from 3 months later. This card is from this date. This card is from this date. This card is from this date. Or it might be like, you know, the gold standard is like qualifications. You should delete people who have bias. And it's like, in the 2AR, I could be like, every card that they read was not qualified. One, this is something like Cato Institute crap. This is some stuff from gas companies. This is some stuff from whatever. It's like the 1AR sets the standard. The 2AR then like actually compares the evidence. And it kind of looks like there's a thread of evidence comparison has occurred entirely through this debate because you've at least established what the standard is for evaluating evidence early on. And then you've done the actual comparison when you have time. But the judge can't say that, you know, you did not have evidence comparison in the 1AR. I did very clearly state that the way that you should evaluate evidence is based on recency. Cool. If folks have questions, you can feel free to pull me aside at lunch, but I know it's lab, so I'm going to let you all go. Enjoy. I think AT lab, I want to say that we're in Haldeman somewhere. Yep. Thank you.